Facts First presents Cape Town wife is horrified after her husband discovers her 3-year secret. A Cape Town wife was horrified after her husband discovered something about her. See, the problem is she did not know for years that she was even keeping a secret. For years, she didn't even know who she was. I'll tell you the story in just a second. First, help us tell the world about who we are by clicking that like button. And also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. A Cape Town man named Abra Muhammad thought that he had lost his wife in a car crash. At the time, a woman with no identification was taken to the Ibn Rost Hospital in Casablanca. The doctors believed that she would not survive, yet her family had to cover the cost of her medical bills. Mr. Muhammad, he traveled 4 hours from his mountain village to get to the hospital to be by his wife's side. By the time he got there, they had told him that she had passed away, and he was devastated. He couldn't believe his wife was gone. He didn't ask to see her, and he didn't ask to say goodbye to her. He just sat in the hospital and cried while the staff wrapped his wife's body in a shroud and put her in a coffin. The devastated husband took his wife's body back to their village so that she could have a proper burial. He wanted her to be close by so that he could visit her grave often. On the drive home, Mr. Muhammad couldn't help but think about how his life was going to be upside down now. He'd lost the most important person in his life in a freak accident. He thought about what would have happened if she would have left home just 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later. There was a good chance she would never have been in the accident in the first place. Well, the man tried to move on with his life, and he moved to a new home. The memories of his wife, though, were still tearing him apart, and he knew he needed to make a fresh start. He decided that it would be best to leave Cape Town altogether. It broke his heart to leave his wife's remains buried in Cape Town, but he says his wife's spirit would be with him always, regardless of where she was buried. About 3 years later, the man's friends were watching a television program called Alma Khanna. It translates to The Disappeared. It was a show that reunited people who had lost touch for one reason or another. While they were watching the show, they were sure they saw their friend's wife. They weren't sure if it was her at first because they'd only seen pictures of her. The woman on the show was trying to find her husband. When Mr. Muhammad found out that a woman who may have been his wife was on the show, he did some investigating. Turned out the hospital mixed up their patients. There were 2 women brought in that day at the hospital. One died immediately. The other had a serious head injury and was in a coma. When she woke up, she had amnesia. She didn't know who she was or where she came from. Since she couldn't remember her life, she couldn't contact her husband. And that left Mr. Muhammad to grieve over who he thought was his wife being dead. He couldn't believe this was happening. As soon as he was sure that this woman on television was his wife, he contacted the show. He told the producers he believes he is the husband of the woman on their show, and the producers set up a time for the two to meet in person to determine if they really were husband and wife. Well, finally the two met, and she was, in fact, Muhammad's wife, and he was, in fact, her husband. It was something the man had dreamed of for the last few years. When he talked, he found out that the theory that people had was true. She didn't know who she was for a long time. After coming out of the coma, the man's wife didn't know where she was, who she was. It took a while for her memories to come back to her. She found out that her husband believed that she was dead, and she didn't know what to do. She wasn't sure if he had moved on with his life, gotten remarried, maybe even had children. She wasn't sure if it would even be in his best interest that she did find him. Well, finally, she decided she did at least want to see him. She was traumatized a bit when she had to tell her story and tell her husband her secret, but when she did, all of her worries were put to rest. Her husband didn't remarry, and he didn't have a new family. He was still pining over her. When they talked, he explained why he left the home that they had shared together. The man tried to get some more information about the woman who was buried in his hometown under his wife's name, but he couldn't get any. The hospital wasn't releasing any information about that woman. Mr. Muhammad believes that they're keeping quiet because of this huge mistake they made. When a hospital mixes up patients, the last thing they want to do is admit fault and go on the record about it. In the end, Mr. Muhammad doesn't really care. As long as he has his wife back, which he does, that's all he cares about. He says his prayers were finally answered. His wife was afraid to tell him her secret, but she was really happy once she did. And so was he. Subscribe for more.